Should you go all out in your workouts? Can you do 5 high intensity interval training sessions in a week? Does any of this matter? We're going to break it all down in terms of both performance and health. And I want to start by going over a series of tweets that Rhonda Patrick tweeted out and I responded to. And I want to be clear here. She was gracious enough to respond in a respectful way and acknowledge where she might have gotten it wrong. So I'm not trying to criticize her personally. We all make mistakes or get things wrong. That's part of it. But I think it helps illustrate a point that a lot of people get wrong and don't understand, especially if they come from the research side of exercise and training and don't have that experience in actually doing a sport that requires interval training or coaching a sport that does. So let's break down her tweets and then we're going to go into the details and I'll give you what I actually think and what will help you in your exercise or fitness journey, whether that's for health or performance. So the first one she tweeted was this: some evidence-based HIIT, high intensity interval training protocols. But if you go down this list, right, the classic Tabata sprint, I covered that in another episode, but notice something: 20 seconds all out, 10 seconds rest. We go to the Wingate, 30 seconds all out, okay, 4 minutes rest. 1 minute on and off, as hard as you can go for 1 minute, and then repeat 10 times. And then Norwegian 4x4, which we'll cover it as well. But I want to focus on those first 3, because what we have here is something that is key and fundamental and that people get all the time wrong. And that is the idea of all out or as hard as you can go. When we write that prescription, what that does when we say all out, first, is not physically or physiological possible. We know this. Just look at the sprint records to the middle distance records. You can't go all out and keep going. Even the 100, they're decelerating in the last 20 to 30 meters. So when we have things like 20 seconds all out with 10 seconds light or off, what if we ran that workout actual all out, sprinting to the max, going? What would happen is after probably 2 intervals, we'd be gassed and we'd slow down and slow down and slow down. And in fact, if you YouTube other people doing HIIT Tabata sprints in running, that's generally what fast-ish and then jog. So first off, all out isn't possible in these workouts. It's number one. But does it matter? Because the argument is that when I say all out, I don't mean all out sprinting. I just mean really freaking hard. I'm going to show you that it does for a specific reason. But I think more so than that is what happens when we use this language is we lose the nuance of intensities that might not matter as much for a novice, but will matter as they go from novice to even intermediate athlete just looking for health benefits. Because that nuance of speed is what determines the adaptations we get. And if we don't understand that, we set ourselves up for failure for seeing things in a very black and white way of either very hard or very easy. And we miss all the great stimuluses in between. And this is research backed. We generally have worse adherence when we think something has to be to the well, go as hard as you can. Why? Because it sucks, right? Lifelong endurance athlete, performed at a high level. Those workouts where you're going literally to the well, they suck. So when we go down this list, Tabata, Wingate, 1 minute on and off, it's not possible as written. As hard as you can go, you just wouldn't be able to complete the workout. Even if we take it and say, we mean as hard as we can go over the extended workout, that's a different prescription. But should we still go as hard as we can for those workouts? 1 minute on and off times 10 is the classic miler workout. 10 by 400, 1 minute rest. You do it in 60 seconds or less, you got a shot at breaking the 4 minute mile. I did that many times. That workout is miserable, and it's at mile pace. Miserable. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's kind of, you got to do it to callous yourself for training for the mile, but it's a rare workout. It's not all the time. So let's break down what would we actually do in these workouts. So Tabata sprints, if you look at the research, they didn't go all out. It was close, but they were at 170% VO2 max on the bike. It's harder to translate this to running, but somewhere probably for most people around 400 to 600 meter pace, which is pretty damn fast, but is not all out sprinting. Okay. Same with the Wingate test. I hate using the word Wingate because the Wingate is actually 1 30-second test as hard as you can go. When you include 4 by 30 seconds, again, it's near max, but it is not max because you have to recover. 1 minute on and off, you're looking at that, as I said, depending on the workout goals, anywhere from 5K to mile race pace. Or for people who aren't runners, anything that you could pace you could sustain for 20 minutes down to maybe around 5-6 minutes for most people. So again, if we run those workouts in those manners, not all out, that Tabata sprint at maybe 800 pace is what I would do it, more than the 400, 600 pace. That Wingate, 30 seconds with 4-minute recovery, that's more at 400, 600 pace maybe, 600 pace probably. That minute on and off, again, 5K down to mile, that's going to be a more effective workout. Why? It gives us a stimulus that is a just manageable challenge that embarrasses the body, but we adapt to. It doesn't overload us. And from beginning to end, we pace it well so we get more out of the workout. Because if you don't pace it well, what happens is that aerobic anaerobic mix, which you're trying to get through the stimulus of many of these high intensity workouts, what happens is if you pace it poorly, you go out really hard at the beginning, you have to tap into more of your anaerobic system. Okay. Then fatigue takes over, you slow down, and the back half of the workout is essentially primarily aerobic, with the anaerobic system just saying, I'm juiced and I don't have enough recovery to restore. So you're not training the systems in the appropriate manner. Okay, which brings me to the point, one of the main points, one of the first points is often in the influencer health world, we don't get the nuance of speed. We don't acknowledge it. In track and field, we know there's a difference between doing 400-meter repeats in 64 versus 60 seconds versus in 57 seconds. We understand that. In the health influence world, we often jumble all hard together and say, oh, it's hard, it's near max or near all out, let's just call it all the same. You're losing training intensities. Think about it in lifting weights. If I tell someone, I want you to go lift the heaviest you can, heaviest weight you can. Is that useful? Maybe initially, but it loses its use very quickly because some stimuluses, whether you're going for hypertrophy, muscular endurance, they're going to need different percentages of that weight and different rep totals to get that adaptation. Same is true in running. The nuance really matters. And in fact, there was a recent review of high intensity interval training, a 4-part review that showed exactly this, that showed that the research on high intensity interval training is often off because we're not studying it in a practical way. The example I like to give here is that when we frame things as all out, what happens is a novice doesn't actually go all out. The research shows this, right? A novice isn't quite capable of it. So they do it at a lower intensity that still feels hard to them. But what happens is as they gain fitness and gain the ability to go harder and harder, what tends to occur is they try to keep going all out. And that workout, instead of feeling, oh, I'm making progress, I'm running this harder and getting faster, and it's becoming easier to run faster, the goal is to go all out and they get a little bit better at that, but the workout sucks because doing these max workouts sucks. And what tends to happen then is adherence drops. People quit because it's not sustainable. It sets us up for failure. Okay, so that's tweet number 1. We covered it. I'm going to go into the research as well. I want to go into tweet number 2. That Rhonda replied to, because I think this is another common mistake that we get. So Rhonda, you can read the tweet up here, but it essentially says, you could do Tabata sprints almost every day. because they're at a slightly lower in shorter duration and slightly lower intensity. Wingate, highly intense, maybe once a week. 4x4 intervals and 1 minute on off, twice a week. Oh boy. All right. This is a bad idea. And again, I'm not trying to criticize. I think Rhonda Patrick does a great job on this stuff. This is just an instance of she knows research, but she's out of her depth on understanding the coaching and the history of interval training. How do we know this? For a couple instances, we actually know this on the research side. So for instance, when they did not Tabata sprints because they weren't around, but very intense interval session way back in the 70s on a classic interval training paper, they had them do it. I think it was for about 8 weeks, and people got better. And they were doing them, I think it was 5 or 6 days a week. It was basically every day. They had one off day, I believe. People made it through the study. They got better. But when asked afterwards, and then when they followed up later on who kept doing it, nobody kept doing it. Nobody. Zero. And they all complained about it because it was miserable. I think there was one guy who tried for a week or two and then gave up. That's the classic research on this. Moving forward, both from history and more research, is it tends to hold. Is that for short periods of time, we can do what I'd call crazy ass shit. Excuse the language, but we can do crazy workouts. This is high school training 101. Sometimes you get as a track athlete, you get a football coach who says, oh gosh, I guess let's just do repeats every day. And you do 200-meter repeats 5 days a week. And kids will survive and they will get better. In fact, this is what we saw in the 1950s or 60s. One of my favorite examples to give is Jim Ryan's high school training. He ran 3:55 in the mile in high school, then ran a world record later on, a year or two later, in 3:51. His training worked, right? Look at it. It's the craziest stuff you have ever seen. Basically, hard workout every day and high volume. But he set a world record. He set a high school record that lasted decades. It worked. It worked for Jim Ryan, ungodly talent. Didn't work for a lot of other people who tried to mimic him. And even Ryan had a relatively short career. He peaked essentially at 19 and 20 when he set those world records and then didn't improve on things, which is very rare in the world of endurance in milers. Right? Milers generally peak mid-20s. He had a lot of injuries and burnout and overtraining. The point is, the human body can handle crazy stuff for a while. We're resilient. That's what happened. That's why it's not just Jim Ryan who did this. If you look at training in the 40s and 50s, Adaptation doing 60x400 basically every day. You can handle it for a while, and it'll get you faster for some, especially if you're talented. But over the long haul, what we've realized is there are better approaches. So let's break it down. Tabata sprints every day is a very bad idea because it's a very intense workout, even though it lasts less than 10 minutes, which we'll come to. It's high intensity every day. We've known since the 1960s, the big breakthrough was Bill Bowerman saying, hey, everybody, we need to alternate hard and easy days. And eventually that became, we need to alternate maybe hard days and 2 easy days or an easy and moderate day. And that was a huge breakthrough in endurance performance and sustainability in exercise for health. We get better adherence rates. Okay. The other workout she suggested, the 1 minute on and off, again, if you run it as she intended, even if it's just at mile pace, God help me if you try and do that 2 days a week. How do we know this? We look at the history of interval training, as I've alluded to. History of training tells us a lot because we've essentially had a natural selection event. Because performance matters, therefore the outcome of the race matters and is measurable. So coaches naturally innovate based on the outcomes. Meaning over time, as coaches have innovated, we've gotten smarter, better at mixing and seeing what we can handle in the right doses, in the right frequency. And what we see is if you go back all the way to the 1930s when Gersler and Reindel were innovating interval training, again, every day was 200s. Every day, repeat 200s essentially. There's some variation, but repeats all the day, pretty hard all the time. And what happened is through the 50s, we started saying, maybe we shouldn't go hard every day. Bowerman comes in. He's influenced by Lydiard. Lydiard says, hey, we need to build a base and we need some long aerobic stuff to balance out this intense work. Initially, Lydiard, during his sharpening phase, still did 5 days of intervals work, plus the long runs on the weekend, aerobic work. Then, as he worked with better and better athletes and innovated, those intervals during the sharpening phase became 3 days a week. We can trace throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s to present day, and we can see that on average, most high-level endurance athletes, I won't even say high level, we can go high school, college, pro, novices to elite. What we generally know is that most athletes can't handle more than about 2 hard workouts and a long run a week. And what I mean long run, really long run, right? Not a normal distance run, etc. Sometimes you can get away with 3 harder sessions. Sometimes instead of 2 hard sessions a week, we can do more moderate sessions, maybe 3 to 4 times a week. This is what you sometimes see in the Ingebrigtsen Norwegian double threshold model. We combine a couple moderate workouts at threshold that is controlled instead of a harder session. But generally, a good rule of thumb is 2 hard workouts a week that aren't to failure, aren't this hard. So when Rhonda talks about doing these workouts once a week, or Tabatas every day, or 4x4, 1 minute on and off twice a week, it's generally what you don't see. Okay, you don't see it. We have a history of interval training. That's like doing 1940s, 30s interval training workouts. It's not what we see now. And I want to add the last tweet before we go into some of the science and research, because I think this again illustrates a common misconception. So this one's on Tabata sprints essentially, and she says, anything under 10 minutes, like what's the big deal? The risk is low. This isn't true. Again, go talk to a track coach. Why? Because you can create all-out workouts that last less than 10 minutes that are some of the most risky workouts, both in terms of overtraining and injury. How do we know this? Think about this workout, 3x200 in 23 seconds with 4 minutes recovery. Actually, that'll put us over the 10 minutes. So let's go 3x200, 24, 3 minutes recovery. We're right at 10 minutes within that workout, essentially. 4 minutes would get us within it. Let's do 4 minutes. That's more realistic. 3x200, 4 minutes recovery, 23, 24 seconds for someone who runs 49 seconds for a 400. So a little faster than 400 pace. That smashes people. And because of the intensity, the recovery off of it, your nervous system is fried. Okay? It's a hard speed endurance session. And it's risky because you're running really freaking fast. And adding a fatigue component of it because there's 2 and 3 reps. So you get to the 3rd rep and you're barely hanging on. You're going fast, but you're hanging on for dear freaking life. And that's where injury risk is highest. We have data on this too. Injury risk highest when you're running fast under fatigue conditions. Okay? So just because it feels, the workout's only 10 minutes, that doesn't mean anything. That tells you the volume of work, but the workout stressor is dependent on both volume and intensity. For instance, if I told you to go run an all-out mile, would you want to show up the next day and do it again? No. Would you want to do an all-out mile 3 days of the week? No, it would be awful, and you'd eventually overtrain. So it's important to realize that, again, we have to consider volume and intensity. And this is where the nuance of intensity comes, because there's variations of hard. I could do those 200s instead of 24 seconds. I could do them in 27 seconds and be okay. Even though they're both fast, right? 27-second 200s, not jogging. It's still pretty quick, even for that athlete. The nuance of intensity matters a lot. Okay. I've covered a lot. I'm going to stop covering her tweets, but I want to now lay the foundation of some of these misconceptions and where they come from. So one is the research. So the research on high intensity interval training, I've covered it in other videos. It's not the best. And the reason is pretty simple. It's because research, it's not the scientist's fault, but they're left with constraints that limit the practicality of the research. What are those constraints? It's often on college novice students, right? That's our population, generally is. Occasionally you get some intermediate athletes, but it's generally novice athletes, which, what does that mean? Clean slate phenomenon. You add intensity to someone who's not doing intensity, even crazy shit, they get better. Just go ask any high school coach or go look at high school training. Some high schoolers do some crazy stuff and get really good. Stuff that no knowledgeable coach would assign, but they had like a football coach who didn't know track and they still got pretty fast. Again, think of Jim Ryan. We can handle crazy stuff. Okay, so one is that constraint. The second constraint is they're often short term. So if you look at these studies, they're 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 10 weeks. What is that? When you take people who haven't done a lot or are Joe joggers or are regular exercises who don't do much intensity, you add 6 weeks of hard, intense work. What are you doing? You're peaking. You're sharpening. This is classic Arthur Lydiard. Volume to way more intensity. Of course you're going to get better. It's a novel stimulus in a new direction. That doesn't mean that workout works. This is also, if you look at these comparisons, are often to a control group, people doing some easy running. Sometimes it's people even doing some moderate running. But generally what we have is if you're going to peak someone for 6 to 8 weeks, of course the intense work's going to work better because you're peaking them and then testing them often on a VO2 max test or something that reflects an intensity that they're not going to experience if they're just doing some easy jogs, right? The control group is poor, okay? And then finally, on this research side, is what tends to happen is we do workout styles that aren't replicable or practical in the real world. Meaning, the studies are for 6 weeks, you're going to do the same interval workout 3 days a week. No one does that because it's the mixture of stresses that get us in a performance. And we know this. We have tons of literature and research on periodization. So instead, what I think we often need to do is look at the history, the natural history of interval training and seeing the pendulum swing back and forth between lots of intervals and short intervals, high intensity intervals, fast intervals, and more extensive, slower intervals until we get to today, which is a nice mixture of everything in a pretty appropriate dose. That guides stuff better. And again, I'm not hating on the research, but if you look at it, the research on intense work generally explains why a session works instead of innovating a session. And we can tell this, right? Some of the great researchers and scientists like Steven Seiler, the reason their research has been so impactful is they looked at what was going on in the real world with world-class runners, skiers, cyclists, and they tracked it and then said, this is different than what we suggested in the research. Wonder why? And then when they investigate it, they're like, oh, no, they got it right. We got it wrong. This is why this works. And this is where you get Seiler's 80-20 rule. You get polarized pyramid training, etc. from looking at research, from looking at what people do in the real world. There's a long history of this. This is what the founders, the godfathers of sports scientists did. David Costal, Jack Daniels, some wonderful swimming coaches. They looked at what worked in the real world How do we explain why it works? And how do we help refine it? And on interval research as well, Veronique Bollat, some great work on VO2 max and interval training. Where did she get her inspiration? If you look at her research and read it, she talks about Zatopek and some of the greats of the 40s, 50s, and 60s who innovated interval training. And she wanted to put some of their ideas to a test. And out of that, we have an understanding of using short intervals at a kind of moderate to moderately hard pace to elicit VO2 max over a longer period of time than if we just did long intervals or short intervals. So again, it's taking this is literally evidence-based, because if you look at evidence-based medicine, it doesn't just say what's the research article. It says evidence-based medicine is using your clinical experience and the patient experience and combining that with the research. It's the same in coaching. It's the same in training for health or performance. We need to look at what's going on in the real world with coaching, what are athletes doing, and what does the research say? And we combine those again. So what? Okay, I've given you a lot. I want to give you a couple of takeaways to understand how you should apply them. So first off is understand the nuance of speed. It's not just all out or hard or sprint and we just call that stuff. I like to think of it more in terms of race distances, as you might see, is what's the pace I could run for 400, 800, mile, 5K, 10K, half marathon. All of those different intensities hit a slightly different stimulus. And if I'm training, whether it's health or performance, and the research backs this up, is I need a variety of stimulus from near max sprinting to steady state marathon pace work to maximize both performance and health. The exact mixture depends on your training goals. If I'm training for a mile, it's a slightly different mixture than I'm training for a marathon. Same goes with health. If I'm training for a mixture of speed and strength, it's different than if I'm training for just cardiovascular health. It varies. Understand the nuance. If you don't race distances, think of it as what pace could I sustain for 10 minutes if I was going max? What pace could I sustain for 30 minutes? You're going to make mistakes. That's fine. That's learning. This is what it's about. But as you do these workouts, look at, did I run relatively even from first rep to last rep? Did I fall apart? Did I have too much in the tank? That's how you learn the nuance of speed and intensities and distributing effort. Second is basically almost never should we do an all-out workout. I shouldn't say never. Every once in a while, we should do what I call a see God workout. You change your perspective. And I want to look at some data here. So this is from a world-class runner, had the Olympic standard, wasn't an Olympian, but Olympic standard, World Championship standard, top 10 in the US in their event. And this is 3 years worth of data. And I'm going to show you both from mental effort and physical effort. They rated every single workout from easy runs to hard workouts to races on a 1 through 5 scale, 5 being max, I'm to the well, I'm all out. This includes race data as well. And if you look at, again, I'll show you both, physical and mental, what you can see is there were very few 5s, only a handful among those 3 years. And the vast majority of them were races. I counted when we counted out both the physical and mental 5 efforts, only 4 were from workouts over 3 years. So basically, slightly more than 1 a year do they go all the way to the well. And this is what we typically see. Lydiard said, save 1 rep in the tank. Jumbo Elliott, a wonderful world-class middle distance coach from Villanova, said essentially the same thing. Save 1 rep. It's generally how you do it. You don't go to the well on hard workouts. You want to go 1 rep short, sometimes 2 reps short. Third, I mentioned this before, but vary your intensities. So the best way I like to think of this for health is we need to go from we need to cycle through different workouts. So if I'm saying, we'll talk about frequencies as well. So if I'm doing 2 hard sessions a week, which again is about the most you can manageably do over a long period of time, then I want to cycle those 2 hard workouts and not do the same. How I cycle them, again, depends on periodization. It's a whole different topic. But generally, I want to make sure that I'm doing something longer and steady. So either a tempo run, meaning 20 minutes at tempo pace, or some longer intervals, something like 4 by 5 minutes with 2 minutes recovery, at a pace that I could sustain for an hour. Maybe sometimes a little slower, 90 minutes, sometimes a little faster, 45 minutes, but in that range. I also want something that's a medium length interval at a pace I could sustain for 5K to 10K pace, or between 15 and 40 minutes, something like doing some 3-minute repeats, 6 by 3 minutes at 10K down to 5K pace, something like that. And then I want something shorter where, again, I'm varying the pace anywhere from, I would say, 3K pace all the way down to near max, where we're doing some 400s, some 300s, some 200s, or some minutes, some 90 seconds, some 45 seconds, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 8-second hill sprints, right? Where we're varying it at something a little faster. Again, there's nuance within these kind of categories. If you were racing, you need to pay attention to that nuance. If you're training for health, it matters a little bit less, but still vary the training stimulus within. And as you go through these interval sessions every week, I would just vary the training stimulus. All right, we've covered a lot. I hope you see that my point is, again, not to trash on Rhonda Patrick. I think she does some wonderful work, and I acknowledge she came and corrected some of the things, which was wonderful. That's what it's all about. This is fruitful exchange. But I think her not understanding interval training from a coaching or athlete perspective is something that is very common out there on social media. And I just wanted to put something out there as a reference for everyone to understand, okay, do I really need to do this many frequent interval training? No, you're not going to maximize performance or health off of that. You're probably going to set yourself up. Why not? Look at history. Look at some of the research. What does all out mean? There's nuance there. Can I really get away with anything less than 10 minutes and being at low risk, high reward? No. Okay. And a variety of other things. So understand the nuance of training. Check out some of the other videos where I go deeper on some of these subjects. And thanks for watching and listening, and subscribe if you haven't. Thank you.